Hey, today it is all about DNA structure. But before we get started into that, I want to recap the video you guys watched yesterday called Cracking the Code of Life. And I told you it was a little bit of a roller coaster, a little cheesy at the beginning, and then I think it took a big downpour and got pretty sad. So the first concept I needed you to understand is they talked about the Human Genome Project, which basically meant mapping out all the genes found in the human race and where to find them on what chromosome. So this allowed people to now to isolate if there was something that was wrong. They could go to that particular chromosome and find that gene and see where the problem was. Now in some species, a lot of our plant species, we're able to find the bad gene, take it out, and put in a good one. They call it gene therapy. And these things are happening in plants and other species, but not in the human race. So then the video took a big downpour, and that's where it went to the sad part, where that family carried a bad gene, which created Tay-Sachs. So you had the identical twin brothers, and ironically, they both carried the bad gene, and then their partners also carried the bad gene. And so you had a family who had two children, very young age, who both had the Tay-Sachs disease. So the problem here is that their DNA, one of their genes had a bad base problem. So instead of an A hooking up with a T, it hooked up with something else. So the instruction manual to build a protein was messed up. Okay? And because that instruction manual was messed up, the DNA could not make a good protein. And because it couldn't make a good protein, the protein in their brain that was supposed to break down fat wasn't doing its job because the protein was messed up. So the protein's messed up because the instruction manual is messed up. And so unfortunately that protein in their brain that was supposed to break down fat wasn't doing its job. And the fat was just building and building to the point where it was squeezing out brain cells until they passed away. So pretty sad. There was absolutely nothing they could do about it after the fact. If maybe they could have fixed it way back when it was the egg and the sperm cell, then maybe they could have taken out the bad gene and put in a good one. But that was something that they were unaware that they even had and carried. So all because something got messed up in their DNA sequence. So looking right here at this picture, here is the cartoon version of what DNA double helixes look like. Okay, and when I told you about the family that had the genetic problem with Tay-Sachs, it's because it was a problem right here. One of the bases did not match up with the right complementary pair. So here's the cartoon version, and now I kind of want to show you the molecular version. So let me grab that video. Okay, so here's the video. There's nothing that you need to write down or anything like that. I'm just going to have you just take a look and see what DNA looks like molecularly.
In this animation, we'll see the remarkable way our DNA is tightly packed up so that 6 feet of this long molecule fits into the microscopic nucleus of every cell. The process starts when
Alright, so I want to show you something on this really quick. So that is your DNA double helix, all twisted together. And it's going to show you how this DNA strand, when it's all twisted and coiled up, how it will form and create your chromosomes that's found inside your cells, right? Found inside that nucleus.
The process starts when DNA is wrapped around special protein molecules called histones. The combined loop of DNA and protein is called a nucleosome.
Those are terms that you don't need to know, so don't stress about that. Okay.
Next, the nucleosomes are packaged into a thread. The end result is a fiber known as chromatin. This fiber is then looped and coiled yet again.
See how it just gets more coiled up and more coiled up and more twisted and more twisted, and then eventually you'll see where it turns into your chromosomes. There it goes, twisting up more and more.
Leading finally to the familiar shapes known as chromosomes. which can be seen in the nucleus of dividing cells.
Alright, so we're going to go ahead and pause it there. I just wanted you to get an idea of the cartoon version versus the actual molecular version. Okay, so here I've got the PowerPoint that we're going to go through to start taking some notes in our notes packet. But here we go. This is back to the cartoon version right here. Okay, and you can recognize there's the parts that are in the middle. And then here's what makes up like our backbone. Right? So there's that DNA double helix. So what I'd like to do right now is I've got just another little video clip that we're going to look at and take some notes on and answer some questions. The questions you're going to find, let's bring this over. So it's these questions on page 3. So we're going to watch the video and I'll pause it and you can kind of fill in these questions as we go. Let's make sure. Yep, this is the page it's on. So we're on page 3. Okay. All right, so get those notes packets out and we will put this video up. Okay, so here's the video, and like I said, we're going to watch this and we're going to answer the questions that's at the top of page 3.
Also known as deoxyribonucleic acid, is a molecule. It's a bunch of atoms stuck together. In the case of DNA, these atoms combine to form the shape of a long, spiraling ladder, sort of like this one here. If you ever studied biology or saw the movie Jurassic Park, you probably heard that DNA acts as a blueprint or a recipe for a living thing.
All right, so you already had your first question was answered for you. I know it kind of cut off a little bit of it, but it asks, what is DNA? So I'm just going to rewind that, give you a chance where you can write this down. But DNA, it's a molecule, and it's called deoxyribonucleic acid, and that's where it gets the DNA for it. So go ahead and get that written down on number 1. So what is DNA? It is a molecule, and it's called a deoxyribonucleic acid. So hopefully we understand what a molecule is. A molecule is made up of 2 or more atoms. And this, my friends, this is a whole bunch of atoms. Right? Every different color represents a different atom. So a DNA double helix is made up of millions of different atoms. Okay, lots of molecules there. All right.
Ladder, sort of like this one here. If you ever studied biology or saw the movie Jurassic Park, you probably heard that DNA acts as a blueprint or a recipe for a living thing. But how? How on earth can a mere molecule act as a blueprint for something as complex and wonderful as a tree, a dog, or a dinosaur? To help answer that question, let's first take a quick look at amino acids. Amino acids are tiny little chemicals inside our bodies that are so important, they're often referred to as the building blocks of life.
Alright, so let's go ahead and pause there for a minute. So it says, what are amino acids? They're proteins. Okay, they're the building blocks of life. Alright, that's what you need to be writing down. So your DNA is what makes these proteins, these building blocks.
About 20 different kinds, each with their own unique shape. The neat thing about them is they can be attached to each other kind of like Legos to produce an endless variety of larger particles known as proteins. Amino acids make up proteins. Proteins, along with other chemicals, combine to form living cells. Cells make up tissues. Tissues make up organs. And organs, when they're all put together and functioning, of course, combine to form living creatures like you and me.
All right, so the next question on there is, what do amino acids create when they are combined? And you have a bunch of these amino acids, all sorts of different types. It's going to make the proteins. Okay. Then the next question goes on to, how many kinds of proteins are there? Okay, let's keep that in mind as we keep watching.
These proteins that make up our bodies, and keep in mind, there's millions of different kinds of proteins. They each have to be formed in the perfect shape in order to function. If they're the wrong shape, they usually won't work. That's where DNA comes in. DNA does a lot of interesting things, some of which we don't fully understand, but one of its main and most well understood functions is to tell amino acids how to line up and form themselves into the perfect protein shapes. In theory, if the right proteins are built at the right time and in the right place, Everything else, from cells to organs to entire creatures, will come out just fine.
All right, so looking at that, so how many different kinds of proteins are there? There's millions of them, right? Lots of different proteins. So then what's the main role of DNA? It is to build these proteins. That is the main role of DNA.
This here is a simplified model of DNA. It shows us that the steps of the ladder are made up of 4 different kinds of chemicals shown here by different colors and letters. If you look at just one half of the molecule, you can read its chemical sequence or genetic code from top to bottom, sort of like a book. A single strand of DNA is extremely long, millions of letters long. It spends most of its life coiled up like a noodle, living inside the nucleus or the centerpiece of a cell. Amino acids, however, live outside the nucleus in what's called the cytoplasm.
All right, so looking at this, says how many different letters make up the genetic code? And there were those 4 different types. Okay? 4 different types.
To help DNA interact with the cytoplasm and convert those amino acids into proteins, special chemicals inside the nucleus make partial copies of the DNA code. These partial copies, called RNA, look a lot like DNA, but they're shorter, of course, and they're missing one of their sides. Their small shape and size allows them to fit through tiny pores in the nucleus.
So I don't know if you guys have heard people reference that before, DNA versus RNA. So DNA makes RNA, and RNA makes protein. So it's like this, 2-step process to make it happen. But you can't make proteins without RNA, and you can't make RNA without DNA. So this right here is the RNA that was built from the DNA. And then it's going to go out in the cytoplasm of the cell to start making a protein.
Out to the cytoplasm and into the mouth of another particle called a ribosome. Ribosomes are protein-building machines. They read the RNA code 3 letters at a time, suck amino acids out of their surroundings, and stick them together in a chain according to the RNA code.
All right, so then it asks, what does a ribosome do? Well, they are the protein factories. They make proteins.
As the chain grows, it bends, it folds, and it sticks to itself to form a perfectly shaped protein. Every 3 letters of the RNA code tell the ribosome which of the 20 different kinds of amino acids should be added next.
All right, so the next question says, how many letters in the code tell the ribosome which amino acid to use? Well, it takes 3. It takes 3 of them. All right, we'll go on to the last one. What do proteins build?
For example, CAA tells the ribosome to grab a glutamine. AGU tells it to grab a serine, and so on. Once a protein is built, it can then go on to do a number of different things, one of which could be to help form a brand new cell. So to answer the original question, what is DNA? DNA is a molecular blueprint for a living thing.
All right, so last question. What do proteins build? They build cells. And if you remember, it showed the picture that cells can make tissue, like muscle tissue. And tissues can make organs, like a heart. And organs can make up a system, like your cardiovascular system. And then a bunch of systems working together is what makes you, right? Okay, so we've got those questions down. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next part. Okay, I need everybody at this point to turn to page 4. And we're going to start taking some notes and do some color coding on DNA structure.